Welcome back to The Short Game. This week we're discussing the incredible indie sort of puzzle platformer action Twitch-based awesome indie game Vvvvvv by Terry Cavanagh.
That's
one
six
of
Vs.
Yes, that's 6 Vs. Vvvvvv.
I think you left out a V.
No, I'm good at this, guys. Vvvvvv. We're really excited to talk about this game. But before we dive in, I am joined by my good brother Shane Kelly.
It is I.
How are you doing, Shane?
I'm so good, I just can't even say it.
Awesome. And how are you doing there, Nate Heininger?
I'm doing well. Fresh off a VVVVVV victory. The V stands for victory 6 times.
Yes, I suppose it might. I am, of course, your host, Reagan Kelly. And I am captaining this ship through the dimension of Vvvvvv. But before we dive in and talk about the game, what's everybody been up to this week?
Right now, I just can't even think about that because I'm just so angry at you for finishing this game. It's ridiculous.
Yes, I am really angry at Nate for finishing this game because I have played this game many times. I have bought it multiple times and played it on multiple different devices. You've heard this story from me before because I love this game. And I still have only ever gotten to the final level. I have never beaten the final level because there's a steep increase in difficulty towards the end.
First off, I'll say, Shane, or Reagan, you obviously have a problem. This is at least the 3rd game that you've discussed that you bought across multiple platforms and never been able to finish.
Well, that's what the show is all about. I am solving that problem.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I know. This Cave Story, a lot of other games I have owned on multiple platforms, and it's because I'm a hoarder. It's just how I am.
Well, I don't know what to say. It was absolutely a difficult game, but I don't know. I got through it.
Yeah, and how long did it take you to complete?
The play time on there actually said about 3.5 hours, but I believe I left it on for a little while. So I think probably realistically under 3, maybe 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
I totaled 1,007 deaths.
I would love to. What would that be worked out across 3.5 hours?
I can do that if you give me just a moment.
I'll wait.
Oh, yeah. Uh, 335 deaths an hour.
All right. And divided by 60?
Well, I got 5.59 deaths per minute.
5.59 deaths per minute.
And it is rapid fire death. There's absolutely an element. I was thinking of like Mario, wherein you die and you feel like you can just jump right back into it and get going, and then you just die and you just die over and over. An interesting stat that I didn't expect. It didn't give me the level precisely, but I did die 74 times on one level. That was the most deaths I had on one single frame.
Which one was that for you?
You know, it didn't tell me the name of it, and that's why I was a little disappointed. It just said one frame.
That's frustrating. I've seen the end of the game on YouTube videos. I've not seen the end of the game in person, although I've gotten very close. But it's usually gives you the name of the level that you have.
Maybe
died
I missed it.
on.
I took a screenshot because I was so proud.
Well, we're all proud of you.
Thank you.
We'll be discussing the game's structure and everything in depth shortly, and also why this level of difficulty and number of deaths per minute is a bit of a theme with Terry Cavanagh, the developer. But before we go into too much depth, what's everybody been up to lately apart from Vvvvvv? Shane?
Well, I've been reading this book. It's called American Elsewhere. Basically, X-Files meets Lovecraft. It's great.
Cool.
And I'm drinking a great Jameson.
Awesome.
And this week, I really haven't had much time to play video games, except for 5 minutes here or there to die in FTL, as we continue to do.
Absolutely.
I believe all 3 of us.
Still probably my game of the year 2013 FTL.
In my kind of non-video gaming life, I'm preparing for a game of Paranoia. So, do you remember Paranoia, Reagan?
I do. So
Have you ever heard of Paranoia, Nate?
No.
It's a role-playing game that basically takes place in the movie Brazil.
That's funny. Yeah, I don't know anything about role-playing games.
It's a tabletop role-playing game where you're living in a world where it's post-apocalyptic, and the world is run by a insane computer that is terrified in this post-apocalyptic world of communists, mutants, and traitors, and combinations of the three. So the omnipresent threat is the commie mutant traitor,
as it still is today.
Absolutely, and it has this sort of humor to it that is really unique in role-playing games because it's sort of a player versus player experience. Certainly you're all trying to work together to solve some mission that the computer has assigned to you, but it's also to your benefit as an individual player to try to expose your fellow players to the computer, who is sort of the game master, as commie mutant traitors. So
that sounds fun.
It's like a role-playing game, but with a competitive angle as well.
Another weird twist is that everyone has like 8 clones, so you can get killed off essentially at any time, and they just send in a clone.
Yeah, which is great because you get to kill each other in bizarre and amusing ways.
Always enjoyable.
And of course, not only are you trying to expose the other people as commie mutant traitors, but you are in fact a commie mutant traitor yourself, of course.
Naturally.
As is everyone. So you have a mutant ability, but you can't be seen to use it, or that people will know that you are a mutant. And you have a secret society that you are a member of, who has also given you a secondary mission as a part of the game, but you can't be seen to be enacting that special mission, or you will be seen as a commie mutant traitor.
I think that's probably about as much as our listeners will want to hear about this weird role-playing game.
Thank you, Shane, for...
Yeah, it's a weird role-playing game from the 80s that is awesome if you can get your hands on a copy of the books these days. We had a ton of fun with it back in the day, and I'm really pleased to hear that you're still playing it, that you've got a group together willing to sit down and try this weird 80s game.
Yeah, that's the idea. It's a group of players that are all fairly new to role-playing games, so...
Nerd.
Yep. Big nerd.
Well, thank you, Shane, for bringing that up. And allowing Reagan to tell us all about it.
Oh,
yeah. Thanks, bro. It really helped me crystallize my thoughts about this game that I have played within the last 5 years and you have not.
Oh.
I'm just messing with you.
Just busting your chops.
Yeah.
So, Nate, what about you, though? What do you... did that download ever finish?
Yes. So for the third week in a row, I will talk about MLB The Show.
The saga of preparing to and never actually playing a game about baseball.
I'm trying to remember the name of your player. It was like Manischewitz or...
Manischewitz. Sir, that's Romango.
Romango. Thank you.
And in fact, it's Romango because he needed a first and last name.
Okay.
Well, Romango's doing well. He's a pitcher in the Seattle Mariners organization, currently in Double-A, working his way up. It's been good.
For a non-baseball person, what is Double-A?
Well, there's major leagues, of course, and then every team has these kind of developmental leagues below it.
Oh, yeah.
Reagan, you know how they have different classification of eggs? Like, there's the grade A eggs, and then there's the grade AA eggs. Well, he's like a medium egg.
Okay. Yeah, kind of like that if those eggs were able to work really hard and be moved into higher classification of eggs. So it's been fun. I don't know how everybody else feels about, sports games, but like I said, I'm a huge fan of any baseball game, and it's been fun. So they have, the thing that I play the most is they do have, it's called Road to the Show, and it's essentially an RPG element where you play one person, that's Romango, and work your way up. So you don't play, like each game, since I'm a pitcher, each game takes about 15 to 20 minutes. And you pitch a whole game, I'm in the AL, so I don't get to bat. So I just pitch and then collect my points. I put those points into, hey, I want my curveball to be more, have more break, or I want my fastball to go faster, and I put points into it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So enjoyable experience so far?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
It's coming over to the PS4. The show series has always been very highly regarded, and I've been stuck on the Xbox series, the MLB 2K, which is an afterthought to the company and really hasn't changed in years. And it's been fun, but this is a whole different element with a development team that actually seems to care about it. Basically, the one on the Xbox, they lost a lot of money every year, but they were the only ones making the game for the Xbox, so they just kept essentially reskinning it and putting out a new game every year instead of
switching the players out.
Yep, instead of fixing bugs. So the last 3 have been essentially the same game, same bugs, same everything. And and me wanting to play baseball games, shelling out $60 a time and being like, this is mediocre, but it's my only option. So I was glad to kind of finally be able to play a franchise that actually is trying to make a good product.
That's awesome. I am also playing a sports game. I have on impulse, I was walking through Target and I saw that Mario Golf for the 3DS is out.
Does that count as a sports game?
Oh yeah, this is a hardcore
that's a Mario
sports, man.
game.
Simulation.
I think it does.
It's sports simulator.
Absolutely.
All right.
Like if you don't have
in real golf, can you shoot a fireball?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm going with yes.
Yes.
Well, I wouldn't know.
Wait, people play golf for real?
I have only ever played golf for real one time, and it was the most awful, embarrassing thing because I was playing with somebody who actually kind of was okay at golf, and it was my very first time, and it was just pathetic. But in Mario Golf, I'm pretty okay. So I'm really enjoying it. It's but there are some complaints I have about it. If you haven't played a Mario Golf game before, all the Mario sports games, at least the handheld ones, developed by Camelot, which is a great series of games, particularly Mario Golf and Mario Tennis for the Game Boy Color, and the similar games for the Game Boy Advance, all had a sort of an RPG element to them, which was very new at the time, where you had your character and you leveled up your abilities. And usually you would do that by kind of hanging out in a golf or tennis academy and playing against other students in the academy. And eventually you would, move up to the upper class. And then you would, finally, as the sort of climax of the game, compete against the world's greatest golfer/tennis player, Mario himself. And so you sort of, as you play the game, you sort of progress from something that is mildly grounded in the reality of the actual game into something where it's layering on slightly more and more absurd, bizarre Mario-isms into the game until finally you're able to do these bizarre Mario tennis moves and such. Which I think is a great progression because you start with this great simple game, you learn the mechanics, and then you get to do something really interesting and otherworldly with it. Great games. Mario Golf for the 3DS has that same aspect, but I do feel like its sort of RPG mechanic has been kind of mellowed down and a little bit watered down. And I think the biggest problems with it is that they have replaced the sort of just stock character that you play as with you're playing now as your me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so the RPG mechanic is lessened because there's really not any other characters for your me to interact with, even if he could.
I think Nate and I might have the same opinion on the whole me thing, given the noise you just made.
We both disgruntlingly kind of sighed a little bit.
Yeah,
I don't like them. I don't like me's at all.
I play Nintendo games to be Mario and be Luigi.
Yeah.
I mean, Luigi's my guy, but you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. And the biggest problem with the Miis is that, in most of the other games I've played as where you're playing as a Mii, there's essentially no personality to the Mii outside of what you give the Mii's face. But in this game, the Mii's actually have, I wouldn't say dialogue, but the Mii's have to make noise every time that you, hit a great shot or you hit a really bad shot. There's a sort of a celebration, or a defeated moment where it cuts to the character that you're playing as. If you're playing in one of the sort of quick modes where you play as Peach or somebody, then that's really cute and it works because those are characters that are iconic and they have a voice that makes sense. When it cuts to a me that is ostensibly supposed to be representing me, it's Reagan Kelly. It's a little cartoon version of me that I designed.
No wonder you hate it.
I know. And it has the most insufferable voice. The voice, I'll put in a clip if I can, because it'll take me a little bit of time to get one recorded.
Okay!
Nice birdie.
Yay! Whoa! Yay! Ah! Yeah!
Nice par.
Hi! Okay! Yeah! Yeah!
Nice shot.
The voice sounds like the most insufferable dipshit. It is absolutely awful. I'll hit a little thing and it does this celebration that's like, and I'm like, I want to murder myself. I want to take this tiny little me and stab it in the eyes every time it does well or badly. And there's no way to turn off the voice. And there's no way, as far as I've told yet, to turn off these little celebrations that happen at the end of it's not every shot, but it's at the end of every hole. It drives me insane.
That was an impressive bit of voice acting there, too.
You are welcome.
Give it another try, Reagan.
No, I'm done.
All right.
That's it. So my overall recommendation on Mario Golf is it is fun if you like the mechanics of the Mario Golf games, but if you like the RPG-esque sort of progression, it doesn't really work as well as the classic Game Boy Advance version, and I would go play that version instead.
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm. I have actually just thought of something that I did play very recently, not since our last show, that I do want to recommend to everybody. I think would be good for any any listener of this show. Have you guys heard of Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon?
Oh, yes.
No.
Okay, have you heard of Far Cry 3?
Yes.
Okay, so the developers of Far Cry 3, which I did play, was a great game, not something that I would describe as short enough to be something that I would kind of say would be a great episode of this show.
Yeah, it was a quote-unquote AAA game. Pretty okay. I actually kind of lost interest in it before completing the plot, which is often my problem with games of that size.
And that's, I think, I felt a lot the same way about it, because I found it a little bit too grindy, because, you'd move from little base to little base, killing identical dudes, and collecting many collectibles. There was a crafting system, etc.
Yeah, it really typified what I think of as the kind of things that this show is not about.
It did that well, in terms of keeping it grounded in first-person shooter action, which was essentially constant. I think that just served to break it up a little bit. Anyway, setting that whole game aside, they took essentially that game, made a smaller, more condensed version of it that was completely reimagined as not a guy on an island fighting with crazy people, but a super soldier on an island fighting with crazy people in a 1980s movie.
I would probably place it more 90s.
I definitely would firmly ground it in the 80s. It's a game where, all the cutscenes are done in the style of, the sort of cutscenes you'd see in an SNES game. I might be misremembering, but I'd swear to God he talks about President Ronald Reagan.
They still talked about Reagan in the 90s.
Yeah, but it's that kind of thing. Back in the day, you had these hard-hitting action movies where, the super high-tech sci-fi action movie looked kind of like it was just somebody took a normal library and duct taped glow sticks everywhere. And that's the design ethos, that's the design style of this game.
That's awesome.
It's great. And it takes all the great gameplay elements of the original game, which is, you moving from little encampment to little encampment all over this island, butchering people with guns, and it gives you much more powerful guns. It gives you all these biological enhancements, and the island is covered in the titular blood dragons, which are just these gigantic blood dragons that have
fine description, sir.
that are like neon glowy laser dragons. It's great. I mean, that adds this whole element where you can like tear the cyber hearts out of your cyber enemies and throw them to attract
Always
the blood
important.
dragons.
Always important. The more
And-
cyber hearts I can pull, the better.
How long did it take you to complete this game?
It took me 15 hours to complete this game.
Oh yeah, well, that's a little outside what I'd consider our scope, but that's
That's
a
close.
great.
But that was with a
Yeah.
fair bit of screwing around, frankly.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, that's
I
close.
enjoyed, taking on these things in new ways and, like, playing around with the different weapon sets.
Mhm.
It has no plot worth really going into, but it does have a plot that was entertaining and moved the story along. And just for the super over the top colorfulness of this game, I would encourage people to check it out.
Cool. Where could they find it?
I picked it up off of Steam as part of a kind of a 2-pack with Call of Juarez. It was one of the first Steam deals that I snapped up this year. I think that deal might still be going on. I put about 7 hours into Call of Juarez before giving up on it. I guess I didn't really like the gunslinger first-person shooter as much as I liked the Blood Dragon first-person shooter.
Not enough blood dragons in Call of Juarez.
Not enough lasers, not enough weird scientists getting their hearts ripped out with my big mechanical hand. Yeah, all of the above.
Okay. Well, it sounds pretty appealing. I'm definitely going to check that out. And I have seen some trailers and things for it, but it's not been one that I've had high on my list. But that sounds appealing now that you mention it.
Yeah, I looked it up. $24.99 gets you those two games.
Oh wow, that's not a bad deal.
You can get the Blood Dragon for just $14.99.
$15. That's great.
Yep.
Oh, speaking of cheap games, something just to follow up on a previous episode, Caro Blaster, the new shooter platformer by the developer of Cave Story, is now out on both PC and iPhone. I know that's a weird combination, but apparently it plays pretty well on the iPhone. I think maybe the PC version would be the version to get, though, if you were wanting physical controls. But it's out on the iPhone. I think it's $5, and it's out on PC, I think, for $10. Although unfortunately not yet through Steam. It's something you'd be buying through the developer's website. I have not played it yet, but I'm hoping to get a chance to do that soon. Came out just a couple of days ago, and it looks pretty neat.
Awesome. Yeah.
So far, it seems to be getting pretty good reviews.
I went and I looked this game up, and I was very disappointed by the fact that it is available for the iPhone, but not the iPad.
I agree, because I actually really prefer playing on iOS. I really prefer the iPad. It's just better for games. The iPhone is tiny.
It's getting bigger.
That's what you think.
MacRumors.com.
Yeah.
www.macrumors.theshortgame.net.
For more details on upcoming Apple product releases, visit MacRumors.com.
So,
We are not sponsored by MacRumors.com.
no, we are certainly not.
I also, I've been playing FTL like crazy, and I'm in this weird problem where all I've been trying to do is unlock ships, and I keep not wanting to give up on my runs when it's obviously not going to be a run that will allow me to unlock ships. So I just keep playing these games and like making it really deep, which sounds like I'm complaining, which I'm not, but I keep making it like, a full run to win the game is like 2.5, 3 hours. And so I keep making it pretty far and not really accomplishing what I'm going for. So that's where a lot of my gaming time has been too.
Still on the FTL.
Yeah, I turned a friend onto this game, FTL, and I saw her this Sunday when I came over to her house to watch Game of Thrones, because she's got HBO Go and I do not. Shout out to Lily if you're out there and listening. I know she's heard at least one episode of this show. I hate you because she has unlocked in the week since I told her about this game she has unlocked more ships than I have ever unlocked. And
there's a lot of, and that's what I'm running into. Some of the harder ships, the crystal ship, the mantis ship, take just basically getting lucky on a set of random number generated stuff. And that's what I keep going for, is these more difficult random ones. And I just have been getting really unlucky, but I'm also have become relatively good at the game. So I generally make it to at least the 6th or the 7th sector every time. And
yeah,
that's going to take a lot of time.
Yeah, it's fun, but it's not what I'm going. Like I'm not actively trying to win, but I also, you get a pretty good ship going. I'm not just going to stop.
Yeah.
So.
All right.
This is my burden. This is my cross to bear.
You poor thing.
Well, you gotta try and save the galaxy.
Well, cool. Let's chat about VVV.
I'd be happy to talk about VVVV.
VV.
I knew you wouldn't let it go. I knew you'd have to make sure I had the right number of V's. So VVV, that's 6 V's, also known as V6 or 6V or
the letter V
WWW.
Yeah, people do sometimes call it WWW, but that is incorrect.
There's a parody game called MMM.
I did not know
Oh
that.
my goodness, I didn't realize this game was so popular as to attract parody. But it's a game in the style of the sort of game that you would have played on an extremely retro system like a Commodore 64. It's
pre-NES style graphics.
Oh, definitely. I believe it was originally a Flash game, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So
most
the
of
developer,
Terry
Terry Cavanagh,
games are Flash.
For the most part, yeah, he's a Flash developer. But this was his first big commercial success. It's the work of all one man, except I believe the soundtrack. Did he have some partner on the soundtrack?
It's a little more complex. The soundtrack is by notable chiptune musician Magnus, I think it's Palsson, also known as Soul Eye. So, very, very, very good soundtrack. One of my favorite chiptune soundtracks of ever. I think it's a terrific soundtrack.
It's great. It's very much. It reminded me of the FTL soundtrack a lot.
Yeah, really.
Though
awesome.
with a little bit more adventure behind it. Actually, Molly, my girlfriend, thought that I had been playing FTL based off of the music.
Mm-hmm.
So,
if you want to check out the album, you can find it under the title PPPPPP.
Is that true?
Yes,
that is true.
That is true.
That's funny.
And so the game. The kind of the idea, the core of the game is it's a puzzle platformer where rather than having any ability to jump whatsoever, you just have a gravity flipping mechanic. So you can't jump over a tiny step, but you can flip and land on the ceiling and back. Stylistically, the game looks a whole lot like games that I never had a chance to play because they are so far retro. Mm-hmm. Like, if you think about games like Adventure on the Atari, or
Pitfall.
Thank you. I was trying to think of Pitfall. The graphics do definitely remind me of that style of game.
Very limited color palette, usually only 2 or 3 colors on screen at a time.
Yep.
It's very visually like a Commodore 64 game or something on the ZX Spectrum, probably the things it would most visually resemble.
Yeah, I read an interview with the developer of this, and he was saying that his idea for the game kind of came from the fact that he, in other kind of platform games, he always really liked the gravity flipping mechanic. It's something that when I first played the game, I was like, oh, it's that makes sense to me right away. I've seen it in several games.
But usually it's something like one level or...
Exactly.
Or in Thomas Was Alone, there was the one block that did it.
Yeah. And he was, started it off as like a short little side project, done to scratch his retro love itch. And he sort of approached it just by, saying, oh, I can't, maybe I'm not that artistic. I can't make a game that looks super great, but I can kind of work within the narrow limits of these games that I really loved when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
If I set myself, so he set, for example, he set himself a limit for the game. You mentioned like a limited color palette. All the tiles for every room have just 5 shades of one color, and the colors and patterns change as you move throughout the game. What I haven't talked about so far is kind of the story of the game. Nate, you played it most successfully, so you have the best understanding of the beginning, middle, and end of this epic arc of a plot, right? So can you tell us the story of the V game?
I'll say, first of all, the story, unlike a lot of our games, was not really the driving factor of the game, at least for me. It was more my need to complete these puzzles, but it still had a relatively interesting story.
It keeps you moving through the game.
Yeah, and it does a good job of having the objectives being based around the story. So it's certainly a major part of the game. I just won't say that unlike Thomas Was Alone, where the story is what drove me to continue playing. This one had a story that just kind of served the mechanics of the game. But anyway, you're the captain, and something happens with your ship, like dimensional warp gate screws up, and you and your 5 crew members get scattered across the map. And then you, as the captain, it's your job to find and rescue each of your crew members. And they all have kind of different characters, and they all have different roles. And as you find them, some of them you have to escort back to a teleporter. Some of them, you're like right there at a teleporter. And that's the core of the game, is finding your crew members.
And the game does have a pretty large map. In that way...
About those characters... Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. About those characters, you should say they all have V names, and that's the reason that the game is called Vvvvvv, because there are 6 of them. And they're named I can't remember, Veronica and Viridian and Verulian and Vermouth and...
I do know the one that I forget the name of the green one, but his name is an obscure type of the color green. So a little bit of thought went into it.
I think I have to find these names so that we can read them out into the show. Wikipedia. Okay, so there's you are Captain Viridian. There's a Dr. Violet, Dr. Victoria, Officer Vermilion, Professor Vitillary, and Chief Verdigris.
You do not call him Chef, sir.
So great names, and actually, not a lot of characterization. All you're getting is very short passages of text in terms of dialogue. But being a video gamer, I am used to the go and rescue the blank scenario, and I think that was enough to keep me moving through the game, particularly when you got to see the map to the game, which you filled in as you explored, and actually it kind of had a little bit of a feel of a Metroidvania game, even in the exploration, even if it had none of the leveling up of your character. Your character never changes in abilities, only you get better at this game.
That was something I thought was interesting about the game. So go ahead, Nate.
Just the exploration part of it, really, I was not expecting. I knew a little bit about the game going into it. I knew that it was very difficult, and it was mostly, Twitch-based, or just... I don't know if Twitch is exactly the right word, because I think of Twitch and I think of like Call of Duty and stuff like that, but... I
think the way that I would put it is that it is a game that requires real precision and great mastery of the mechanics. So it's constantly building. It has that one core gravity flipping mechanic, and that's your only interaction. But as it layers in new types of obstacles for you to get around, new types of dangerous things that will instantly kill you, you're constantly having to get slightly better and better and better at using that gravity flipping mechanic to get around through the different rooms.
Can I be honest with you guys for a second?
Go.
I thought, and I still believe that this might be part of it, and it's probably double meaning, but until I had never thought about the fact that they all had V's in their names, and Vvvvvv was based off of that. I thought rather that the core bad guy of this game is spikes that all look like little V's. So I think it's probably
I think
a
that
double
makes perfect
meaning.
sense. And I actually, if you go to, there's a great little wiki about this game, and there are at least 6 competing ideas about what the name means. So, and that's one of them listed. So I absolutely think that's valid.
I feel like that's where it
Is
started
it valid,
from. and they
valid,
did-
valid?
Yes.
I feel like that's where the name started from, and he decided to name all of them after V's after
I think so.
calling it VV. But yeah, the exploratory nature of it was surprising to me, because it starts out and you just kind of work your way through a puzzle or through a couple parts of the map, and then it opens up and you see the whole world, or you see that you have to explore the whole world. And that caught me entirely off guard. In fact, so much so that I didn't realize it at first, that it was actually up to me to decide which way to go. And you kind of jump out of the ship. It doesn't look like a ship, but it's basically just one of the rooms. You kind of fall out of it, and you just keep falling down. And then I hit spacebar, which moved me up, and I went right back up to where I had fallen down from. And then I went back down, over to the right, and pressed up. And I ended up doing this like kind of strange circle, like thinking, where do I go next? What should I be doing right here? There's nothing like guiding me through. And that's when I finally looked at the map, and I was like, okay, obviously I have to decide which way I want to go. And it took me a moment to put that together, and I thought that was a really interesting way to handle a game like this.
It gives you a lot of freedom, but within pretty tight control, because there are some things that are just too hard to tackle early on in the game. But I think actually it did a really good job of routing you towards the things that were good to do in a sensible order. So
See, I don't know that I 100% agree with that, because one of the very first things I found was something that I still never have been able to complete. And maybe I just got lost and had a hard time, got completely turned around from the normal path. But I came across an incredibly difficult room that even had there's little terminals that are kind of thrown across the map that just kind of give some flavor text. And this one said, "Don't bother here. No one's ever going to make it anyway." And I died a ton.
what a challenge.
Yeah, I died a ton. There's 20 trinkets that are in difficult to locate spots, and I found one of them.
Collectibles.
Yeah.
Was that the
And-
one? I'm sorry. Was that the one that was Vvvvvv?
I think
Where you
so.
fall, you have to go through, fall up through 3 rooms to get, and then fall back down through 3 rooms just to get over a tiny block.
That's exactly it.
Okay, because I knew when you were saying that, I knew exactly the one you were talking about, because I hated that part of the game so much. I tried it a bunch of times, and I never even got all the way to the top to start falling back down.
And just to explain what you mean by Vini Vidi Vici, every room in the game, first of all, the map is divided into many equally sized rooms, one screen at a time. And unlike most platformers, or really most video games, you don't scroll as you move from place to place. The view doesn't follow the character. You move from one side of the screen to the other, and if you exit the screen, then you are coming onto the screen in the next screen. So the game is played in a very similar way to a lot of older games that didn't have that scrolling background option for technical reasons or technical limitations. But here, they use that to kind of isolate individual problems or puzzles on a much larger map. And usually you have to sort of pass through one puzzle to get onto the next room. And every single room gets a name. And usually the names are really clever or jokey, or give you some kind of a clue as to what you need to do in order to actually complete the puzzle in the room. I actually thought the names of the rooms was one of the most charming things about the game, and kind of added a little bit of interest to each individual puzzle room.
Yeah, I heard that the developer actually himself was not the one that named the rooms. That it was a guy named Bennett Foddy, who was the developer of QWOP.
Oh, really?
Really?
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah, he did the naming.
That's awesome.
Well,
QWOP
yeah, it does a good
actually
job.
has a similar level of difficulty to this in some ways.
Oh, it depends on what you mean by difficulty, I guess.
This,
No, QWOP is impossible.
A very different sort of difficulty.
I beat this game. I cannot make it more than like a meter in QWOP. Yeah.
You cannot remain vertical. Yeah. So, great structure that kind of involves progressing through a wide open map that is also simultaneously divided into tiny individual puzzles. And you're kind of exploring the game and finding all of your goals and hopefully collecting trinkets along the way. But as you play, you're going to be dying again and again and again and again and again. And that's the thing that I think is really key to the way that this game manages to match its difficulty with some balance and fairness and not feel like an unfair game.
It's non-stop. I mean, we talked about it at the start of the show. I died 1,000 times.
Yeah.
What other
1,000
game
times in 3 hours.
Yeah.
What other game can you think of where you've died 1,000 times?
The game that I most relate this back to is actually Super Meat Boy, which actually came after this game. But Super Meat Boy, didn't do as much for me as this game did, because there are many, many, many checkpoints in this game, usually multiple checkpoints on every single individual room screen. And that allows you to die again and again and again and again and again on a difficult moment. And then when you get past it, you're immediately at another checkpoint again, and you can start working on the next room or puzzle. And I thought that it was really... that's the thing that I think this game balanced incredibly well, was while it is a brutal game in terms of just mechanical difficulty, this game asks a lot of you. It also is incredibly fair. It never seems to punish you for failing at a task. It will always just say, no problem, here you are right back at the beginning of that again, not too far back from where you were just seconds ago, and you can jump right back into what you were trying to do within a second or two of having died.
Yeah, and that's what led to it's both a blessing and a curse, because you immediately respawn back where your checkpoint was, and so much so where one of them will have you be running and you have to hit space to go to the roof when there's a row of spikes right below, and I will be holding right to do that, and I'll mess up and fall into the spikes. My guy respawns, and I'm still holding right, and I'm like, I got this, and I run right back into the spikes. And I'm like, nope, I got it this time, and I run right back into the spikes. And you die rapid fire, and you have to slow down and be like, hold on, let me take my time with this and try to accomplish it. But it's so easy to just, Russian Warfront, where you just keep, not even taking your time, just running into it. And that's probably 400 to 500 of my 1,000 deaths, no exaggeration, they were not even a legitimate attempt. It was me dying almost immediately upon spawning and just failing to hit the space bar because I wasn't even thinking about it. I'm just like, go, 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 just keep trying.
You realize that the number of deaths isn't like your high score.
I think that's how I treated it. Every time I died, I was like, dang it, I
did consider it a little bit of an achievement when I looked and realized that in the 2.5 hours that it took me to reach the final level, and I'm still on that final level, I had died 1,056 times, which is, a lot of bodies.
And I feel a personal
Vvvvvv.
accomplishment. I feel a personal accomplishment based on the fact that I beat it while having less deaths than Reagan, and he has not beat it yet.
I hate you.
So, yeah.
So the game has this really interesting structure which ties it both visually and in terms of its difficulty back to these older games. Specifically, actually, we didn't talk too much about the games that Terry Cavanagh has said he specifically drew his inspiration from. But something kind of fascinating about this game is that it really goes right back to games on the Commodore 64, and specifically a really, really important game called Jet Set Willy. Jet Set Willy is another game that has this same kind of structure where you are playing through individual room screens, each one of which is kind of a puzzle in and of itself. It's a much slower pace. It's worth looking it up on the web, but it was a game that originally came out, also sometimes called Manic Miner on the ZX
He actually
Spectrum.
said in an interview that he had never played Jet Set Willy, the developer.
Well, there goes Reagan's entire...
There goes Reagan's whole thing.
No, Shane, I actually read the same interview that you did, and he did not say that he had never played Jet Set Willy. He said that he had never owned a ZX Spectrum. A ZX Spectrum is the first computer that the Jet Set Willy game came out on, but he owned a Commodore 64, and there were innumerable games based on Jet Set Willy on the Commodore 64, including a port of Jet Set Willy itself, but also many, many other games on the same sort of theme or style. This was a time in Britain where the ZX Spectrum and the Commodore 64 were becoming enormously popular, and there was a huge video game scene for them that we just really never saw on this side of the Atlantic. And Jet Set Willy, Manic Miner, and innumerable other games based on it sort of made the core of that scene, and those are the games that this game is based on. A kind of an interesting side note, by the way, while I was researching this, was I looked up some video of Jet Set Willy on the Commodore 64, and really visually it does have a lot kind of going on that looks a lot like this game. But something that I noticed that I looked into and thought was a real surprise was that when you look up Jet Set Willy for the Commodore 64, which was a port of the ZX Spectrum version, not the original developer, but the developer of the port was Shahid Ahmed, who is actually still active in games today, and he works as the senior business development manager at Sony. I've heard a lot of interviews with him recently. He's still working because he is responsible for bringing indie games to the PlayStation 3, 4, and Vita. He's sort of their developer relations consultant. Kind of an unrelated side note, but if you want to hear a really interesting interview with Shahid Ahmed, one of my favorite video game podcasts, Directional, had him on. I think it was in their 4th or 5th or some episode, and it's absolutely great. He talks about his experience as a bedroom coder in the early 80s in England. He talks about his and working on the game Jet Set Willy. He also talks a little bit about what it's like to work within a big company like Sony and trying to reach out to indie developers and make it easy for them to bring their great games to his platform. Really a really interesting interview and a really interesting guy, and just thought of it interesting connection. And as a connection to Vvvvvv, Vvvvvv is being ported to a lot of new platforms this year. Currently, you'll find Vvvvvv on Linux, Windows, and Mac, and also on the Nintendo 3DS eShop. But you'll also be seeing it coming out this year on the PlayStation 4, the PS Vita, Android, the Ouya, and also on iOS, where it's going to have a touchscreen-based controls, which I actually saw a video on the web of somebody playing it using these touchscreen controls, and it actually works. So, yeah, it's a game with a lot of future to it, even though it is a few years old.
But
So
it's hard
the
for me to
video,
imagine
I saw the
playing it
same
on
video
iPad.
as Reagan. It is hard for me to imagine as well, but this video shows an actual human being holding a real iPad using touchscreen controls to beat that same room that we were talking about just a minute ago.
Vini Vidi
The
Vici.
Vini Vidi Vici, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I agree. I believe you that exists, but I'm
Yeah.
not convinced.
How many takes? That's the question.
200.
probably-
One thing I wanted to throw out to you guys, and I don't really have an opinion one way or the other, but one thing I was thinking about while playing this game is that, maybe 5 to 7 years ago, this would be a free game on like Newgrounds or any of those style websites.
Kind of where it started.
And now it's a $5 game on Steam. I think that's an interesting progression of games like this.
I think it's great that indie developers are able to market and sell their work now, and I think it's part of the reason that we're seeing so many great indie games coming out with such quality. Really, people can afford now to spend 2 years of their life pouring their heart and soul into a great little game and put it out into the world and not run themselves into bankruptcy doing it, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, there was advertising back then too. If you had a really popular game on those websites, you were making some money. It's been an interesting development though, but I think it really, like you're saying, it does speak to the popularity or the growing popularity of games like this and kind of why we exist, why we're doing this whole thing.
Absolutely.
I think it's definitely a good thing for the developers. It is just interesting to see something go from free and, played in a browser to distributed through Steam and on the DS and on iPad and all that.
You're absolutely right. And this is actually a really great example of a sort of a transitional game for that. It really sort of rides the early wave of indie games as a market, as a place where people can make a living. Terry Cavanagh started off making Flash games for places like Congregate.com, and he wrote a lot of really cool stuff there. And a lot of his games were less, because he was not intending them to make money, a lot of them were things that weren't very marketable, things like sort of games as art type projects. But when he started creating this game, he knew he wanted to market it. He knew he was putting enough effort into it that he wanted to make money on it and sell it as a product. But it was originally developed as a Flash game. He was still working in that mode. And the very first version of this game were released on websites as a Flash game. Later, that version got essentially tossed out and rewritten because when he wanted to release it to a wider audience, he knew that it needed to move beyond Flash. And particularly if he was going to release a Linux port, which he initially had planned to do and then wasn't able to do using his Flash-based version of the game. And he was required, essentially, to have a Linux version of the game because he wanted to include it in Humble Bundle 3, which is where I picked up the game initially. Humble Bundles have been an amazing force in and of themselves for indie games. But he wanted to put the game out as a part of Humble Bundle 3, and in order to do that, he had to have a Linux version. What an amazing requirement, little catch that the Humble Bundles have included. And in order to do that, it needed to be rewritten from the ground up in C++. So he worked with another developer, Simon Roth, to bring that game over to Linux, and in the process rewrote it entirely in C++, which has also meant that the game could then be widely ported. That's why we ended up with the version on the 3DS, and that's why we're ending up with versions on all these other platforms, is because it's been able to be ported even to all sorts of other devices. So what started out as a simple Flash game has, in early 2010, has come to, over the last few years, be available on a zillion platforms.
Yeah, it's basically on everything. So if you haven't played it, you have no excuse any longer.
Mm-hmm. And it's super cheap. $5.
He's still making Flash games, though. I think that's still his preferred way to develop games.
Mm-hmm.
I was on his site and I spotted he made what's described as a Flappy Birds fan game, which I wound up spending all too much time playing. This is an utter sidebar, but I've found Flappy Birds to be just so ridiculous in both its popularity and just its horrible gameplay. But
don't get me started. I have all kinds of opinions about Flappy Bird.
Yeah, I will not get you started. But this guy managed to make a very enjoyable take on Flappy Birds, and it really kind of showed his kind of style. It kind of played like the Flappy Birds version of Super Hexagon, and it's a great little Flash game. You play it right there on his website. Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, we've been talking about how difficult this game is and how frustrating it can be. I can't remember a game lately that I've had a more physical like excitement.
Oh my God!
After completing a certain puzzle, because it's so fast when you actually complete a certain challenge, if you will. It's like seconds. I mean, you die 30 times trying to do one thing that once you complete it, it was maybe a 2 to 3 second interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And I would complete it, land safely wherever I'm trying to land, and just like convulse with excitement.
And then you'd get to a checkpoint and then immediately die again.
Yeah.
I almost liken it to something more physical, like dunking basketballs. If you were standing in a...
Wait. You don't know anything about dunking basketballs.
Tell us about dunking basketballs, Reagan.
It's like what I imagine dunking basketballs might be like if that were a thing that I had ever done. Because you're trying again and again and again with something, and then suddenly you get it in.
The fact that you say it that way makes me know that you've never dunked a basketball. You've never even set foot on a basketball court.
You have humbled me. But I feel like it's a physical thing. You're practicing a physical skill with each and every level of this game. And suddenly, when you perfect that skill, it is a complete moment of explosive excitement. So it's like having an orgasm. Is that something that we could possibly believe that I've ever had?
No.
Okay.
No. Still no.
Okay. So no basketballs and never an orgasm. Got it.
Yeah.
It's an incredible game, and just the physical nature of it is something really unlike anything else I've ever
This
played.
is making me really uncomfortable to hear from you, so I'm just going to have to change the subject. So where can people play this game, guys?
Well,
We've been talking about that.
we did kind of. It's available on Steam, but
I don't
actually,
know what this...
if you're going to pick up this game, why not grab it from the Humble Store? It's available on the Humble Store, which gives you a Steam copy of the game. Sometimes they have a little cheaper price than Steam. You get a DRM-free copy in addition to that, and a little bit of your money goes to charity. I've been getting in the habit of, if I'm buying a game and I think it might be available on the Humble Store, I'll check there first, because usually you're kind of getting a better deal. You get the DRM-free aspect, you get to know that a little bit of your money goes to charity, and you still get that Steam key if that's how you prefer to store and kind of browse your library.
I actually have a question for you guys that I've just remembered I wanted to ask. The style of this game, we talked a lot about the sort of Commodore 64-y style of the game, but there are elements that you would never have seen in a Commodore 64 game. Most notably, some of the bizarre enemies and level decorations.
Good point. We really didn't talk about some of the weird stuff in this game, because this game really has some
really out there.
weird stuff.
Like the big flashy elephant room.
Oh my god.
Yes! Can we finally talk about the elephant in the room?
Okay, so perhaps we should fire a spoiler? Actually, I don't think we need to.
I don't
really,
think so.
It's
I
just
don't think
weird
there's a
stuff.
single
So
thing
yeah,
that can be spoiled about
I
this
don't
game.
think there's anything about this game that really is subject to spoilers, with perhaps the exception of the very end of the game, and even
Hey
that.
guys, at the
I
end,
think-
you save everyone.
Yeah. I feel like we already talked about that
Yeah.
just by the description. This game is not about any of that.
It is
the
not
game
about
is
a
about
story.
mastering the mechanics. So the story is good. It's
fine.
You know, it's fine.
It's
the characters can be kind of funny sometimes.
Some of the dialogue
can
is
be-
cute.
Yeah, but it's better than a lot of games that rely on, mechanics, but it doesn't really matter.
That's where I sort of compare it to a game like Super Meat Boy, because Super Meat Boy also had that dying 100 times to complete one tiny task, sort of explosive, really high level of mastery required to progress kind of thing. But Super Meat Boy, it had even less plot than this, and also it didn't feel as fair with its sort of checkpoints and things. I think what kept me moving through this game, I might put this game down for a day or a week if I was truly stuck, but I would come back to it again because I did, at my heart, want to save all of the crew members and complete the game. And part of that came from the writing in the story, even as simple as it was.
Yeah. It was enough.
Mm-hmm. It was
The enemies,
perfectly adequate.
I played Super Meat Boy for about 45 minutes, and I just wasn't that interested.
Yeah, I didn't get into it I played more than that, but it got too punishing too quickly, and it didn't feel fair the way this game feels.
This game I started last night, and we're talking about it tonight, and I'm the only one who's beat it. Just want to make sure
Still hate
everybody
you.
remembers that.
Still
Yeah.
hate you.
You know,
I
I
hated my Spurs.
feel like I'm better than you guys.
Yeah.
So.
You are.
Also, you know,
I never claimed to be good at games. I just like talking about them.
yeah. Actually, generally, I'm not very good at games, but this game, for whatever reason, out of the gates, I felt like I was pretty good at it.
The very
It took
first
me a
time I
little
played
while.
this game, I did not get very far with it at all. This most recent time that I played it, I actually picked it up on the 3DS because I actually think the 3DS version is a great version of the
It
game.
makes sense. I bet it totally adapts itself well to a handheld device with a D-pad and buttons. I still don't believe that it'll be good on mobile device.
We'll see. I'm really excited to try it on the iPad. I'll probably buy it there, and I'll probably play it almost all the way to the end. And
yeah, I
probably
mean,
won't
I
finish
will
it,
too.
because
You
that's
know,
what I
I'm
do.
sitting here like, I'm probably gonna get it and play it.
Well, as
so.
far as the controls are concerned, what I saw in the video of them playing it on a touchscreen actually kind of seemed a little bit innovative. Essentially, you would tap the right-hand side of the screen to move to the right, the left-hand side of the screen to the left, or rather than try to have some kind of on-screen button for the flipping, that's just too hard in a game that is this twitchy. It would do the flip mechanic if you tapped both the left and the right at the same time. So they managed to essentially retool the game so that its controls essentially only involved 2 buttons instead of 3. And I think that actually could work.
That makes sense to me, but man, this game is so specific with your movements. I just can't imagine how anyone will be good at it. But hey, I trust the developers. If they're going for it and they think people will like it and enjoy it, then by all means,
Yeah.
they should do it.
However, I think the game's going to be really stunning on the Vita. I think that's a great platform for it. And the Vita
Yeah, we
is
know you
a
love the
great...
Vita.
I don't own one. I don't love the
Oh,
Vita.
wait, I'm sorry.
But-
I was thinking of your NVIDIA Shield.
I love the NVIDIA Shield. It is coming out for Android, and I'll be buying it for my NVIDIA Shield. Definitely see you there. So yeah, it's coming out on a lot of great platforms, and I think it's got more of a future to it. We kind of... I think that the once these ports are out, that Terry, the developer, is, I know Terry pretty well. I don't.
Yeah, on a first name basis.
And I'm pretty sure he's kind of done with the game after it's out on these new platforms. But there are fan-made levels for the game. It's got a level designer, and there's more to it if you want to complete the game and go any further with it. That said, it's a great self-contained experience, and even I, having never completed the game, felt like I got a really complete experience. I got as far as that final level, and then I watched the last 8 screens on YouTube, the ones I wasn't able to get past.
Just do it. I don't know. There's one part at the end that's really, really difficult. I had way more problems like in the middle. The Gravitron took me
Oh
forever.
my god, the Gravitron. Oh my god, you just gave me a total Nom flashback.
Yeah.
The Gravitron was that
I
level...
don't remember the Gravitron.
Oh
so
my God.
I know it's been a while since I played this game, but
The Gravitron
please
is the
remind me.
level where... So one of the mechanics in the game is that there are these sort of lines or little force
Oh,
field
the flippy lines, yeah.
that when you hit them, if you fall into them, you don't stop, you reverse direction. And the Gravitron was a level where essentially they put 2 of those lines so that you couldn't stop your
Yes.
character. You were
Oh,
only ever
yeah.
bouncing up and down, and you couldn't control the speed at which you were bouncing up and down. So all you had control over at that point was your left to right movement as your character kind of bounced up and down. And then through this sort of tunnel that you were sort of forced to bounce in for a certain period of time, these little random little boxes would fly through, and if you touched any one of them, you were dead. And do you remember how long you had to stay alive in the
I think it was
Gravitron?
just
Yeah,
30
I did it.
seconds or something.
I did it this morning. So you had 1 minute to survive. Now, fortunately, as we talked about, this game does have give you a little bit of breathing room. Every 5 seconds you survived was considered a checkpoint.
Yeah.
So you could kind of pick back up from that 5-second
But this
mark.
was like surviving for 5 seconds while dancing through buckshot fired at you from a shotgun. It's impossible. So every time I survived for another 5 seconds, I felt like it was an enormous triumph. Surviving 5 seconds in the Gravitron was like something out of a horror movie.
Mm-hmm.
It was brutal, absolutely. And the trick that I finally remember now in this was like, if you just flee from the items were kind of moving around in these bizarre patterns. If you would flee from them for just a moment, you could hopefully get your bouncing rhythm to line up with theirs a little bit so that you could make it past them. But it seemed to be so almost random. It was so
difficult.
deadly.
Yeah,
Something that we
difficult.
didn't really talk about the gravity switching mechanic that's really important to the difficulty of the game is that once you switch the gravity, you couldn't switch it again until you stopped, until you hit something. So if I was standing on something and I reverse the gravity and start falling upwards, I'm not going to be able to reverse the gravity and come back down until I hit the ceiling, no matter where that ceiling is. And that's part of what made a lot of these levels so difficult, was that, sure, it'd be really easy if I could drop down and then reverse the direction and drop back up again, or vice versa, but not being able to switch the gravity at will at all times, only being able to switch it when you're stopped, or when you're stopped on a surface, really added to the difficulty of a lot of the games and really made the puzzles sort of work, because a lot of them would have been just too easy otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. And it led to really funny things where you hit space and you're like, ah, crap, and you fly up like 8 rooms because the area that you can explore is pretty big, and you just float upside down.
And you fall endlessly.
Yep.
Until finally you hit something and you're like, oh, I didn't know this was here. So it's kind of a good way to explore the game. So those weird things we were talking about, the Gravitron was a great level but I wouldn't say it was one of the weird aspects of the game. Sorry, we kind of left that hanging, talking about the weird stuff.
I just really remember there was a room where the enemies were like just words.
Oh yeah.
There's a string of places where the enemies and I say enemies, mainly it's just like dangerous things flying around near
They
you.
move in some sort of pattern.
They don't really seem to have any animosity to me. They were just extremely deadly to touch.
Yeah, nothing ever comes and attacks you. It's more that you're moving through an obstacle course made up of little moving creatures.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there'd
like,
be a lot of words.
The word truth is like flying around. In the next screen, the word lies is flying around.
Or yes. Or the little yes men that were little like men with yes printed on them.
Or avoid. Straight to the point.
Thanks for that label.
Yeah, little hearts breaking in half.
Oh, geez. The Heartbreaker levels were horrible.
Yeah, that was near the end.
Yeah, those were really hard. And, of course, there's the omnipresent spikes, which weren't weird. They were, you instantly understand what spikes are all about. But there were spikes everywhere. Like, most of the surfaces in the game are covered with spikes.
Yeah, and you're just maneuvering your way in between
And
spikes.
one of the very strangest moments in the game that we already talked about just a few minutes ago was that there is a very, very large elephant that's actually so large that it spans 4 separate rooms that's flashing in a multiple sort of colored pattern.
It's kind of a disco elephant.
Yeah.
And it's crying.
It is. It has a little tear coming down its cheek. And if you stand next to it for more than a few seconds, Viridian also sort of looks sad and starts crying. Interesting thing about that, no one's really sure exactly what it is, but it's widely expected that it is actually a deliberate reference to Jet Set Willy. There was a elephant room in Jet Set Willy that I've seen photos of, and while the elephant is significantly smaller, it is very similar in its sort of position and everything.
I feel like that's got to be it then.
Yeah, it's probably just a reference to Jet Set Willy, but why is it crying? And I don't know. It's very strange.
It really comes out of nowhere too, because there's like no connection with any type of like real world or anything in this game.
It may be the only representative image in the game, apart from the characters themselves.
But they don't look
representing
like
people.
humans. Yeah, they don't really look like humans though.
They look like humans as drawn by an 8-year-old.
Yeah, and then you
in
just
Mario Paint.
stumble upon this weird room where it's a massive disco elephant. It's very confusing.
I loved coming across that. It almost felt like I was discovering something secret.
Yeah,
Except it was huge.
but I mean, it's kind of in a weird spot. You kind of have to go through a weird set of tubes to get to it.
Yeah, the internet.
No, that was a terrible laugh.
Yeah. Good
Yeah,
joke,
there's
guys.
nothing. There's nothing else like it in the game, though.
So this
Weird
game,
elephant room.
I really truly enjoyed playing this game, and I would 100% recommend it to anyone. If you are the sort of person who likes the physical aspect of video games, if you like mastering a game, then this is a game for you. If you like games like NES games like Mario or Mega Man, and you enjoy the sort of physical mastery that those games require from you and the repetition of new and slightly varied mechanics, then this is a game that you would want to check out. If you like older games from systems like the Commodore 64 or the ZX Spectrum or other things like that, then this game's really going to feel right at home for you. If you primarily play games for the plot and you like an experience that doesn't demand a lot from you physically or mechanically, this may not necessarily be your game, but it's still worth a try. At just $5, you can pick this up on Steam or the Humble Store, or I forget exactly what it costs, but a similar price on the 3DS eShop, and hopefully soon on all those other platforms. So one of my top recommendations, and I think really an important game in the recent history of indie gaming as a sort of commercial landscape. Anybody have anything to say to conclude?
Not really, just absolutely play it. It's hard, it's frustrating, it's difficult, but it's so rewarding. Just getting through these little challenges, it's a ton of fun. I had a great time playing it, even though there were absolutely times where it's just like felt like I was beating my head against the wall. There's a combination of trying to figure out what it is you have to do, and then actually being able to do it. It's tricky, but 3 hours, 1,000-something deaths. No big deal,
It is really just, in a way, just a novelty to play a game that allows you to throw yourself into pits with such infinite speed. I've never seen a game that allowed you to kill yourself 6 times within a minute.
And I said it earlier, but at least half my deaths were needless deaths, where I just was not focusing, just running into spikes over and over and over.
And if nothing else, play it for the amazing soundtrack.
Oh, absolutely. That was such a good part of the
It
game.
has
I had
very,
it full
very good
blast.
soundtrack.
It's fantastic.
So thanks so much, guys, for joining me with this latest episode. Hopefully, we'll be able to come back and talk next week. I'm going to be on vacation here for a bit, but I'll be back very shortly in about a week, and we'll chat about probably our next game. What's our next game?
Oh, we're talking about Outlast.
Yeah.
That might be fun. You and I have been playing a lot of Trine 2, so that might be something that'd be fun to talk about.
Yeah, that's been a good game. Anything you've got in mind, Nate?
Not at the moment. I'm sorry. No.
That's cool. So we'll have an announcement up on our blog pretty shortly about what our next episode's going to be, or it may already be up by the time that you are listening to this episode. And we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Cool, man.